broadcast at the beginning of the race did not go smoothly. Discuss.
Well, the whole situation was not ideal as to how that went down. So let's kind of go over what happened. And in some ways, I probably shouldn't even do this because I'm not an NBC spokesman. But I do have a radio show, so I don't think it's fair to just say, I can't talk about that. So I'm going to talk about it to some extent. And there are some things I know, and there are probably some other things and decisions that I'm not privy to or may not fully understand. So as I said last week, the plan was to basically come on the air and see racing. And I think that's a solid strategy because, keep in mind, you're trying to retain an audience. In television world, what you want to do is you want to follow a program that has a bigger audience than you and have a chance. It's why NBC would always put a new sitcom on back in the 90s right after Seinfeld. You know, that's how you built Friends and everything else, because you can put drivel on, and at least for the first show, you're going to get a huge rating. Then at some point, they might figure out it's drivel and it still doesn't survive.
Whenever Fox wants a new cartoon, they put it on right after The Simpsons.
Exactly. So that's the theory there. And last year, we went ahead and did about a 15 or 20-minute pre-race, and the rating wasn't as good as it had been a few years before, and I can't remember the circumstances. Maybe NASCAR ran late and it got started. But the theory was, especially when you're talking about people who might not necessarily be IndyCar fans and certainly are less likely to be interested in chatter, you know, me talking, the booth talking, whatever, an interview with a driver. They want to be entertained. Pre-race shows, pre-game shows do not get the same rating that the actual event does. So, and by the way, also, most savvy sports fans or racing fans know that, well, a pre-race show is normally 45 minutes long. I'm not going to wait 45 minutes for this race that I maybe don't care all that much about anyway. But if you come on the air and the first shot is drivers sitting in their car, we talked for 2 or 3 minutes, and that was the plan. Command was at 6:33 Eastern was the plan, and we'll get to that. And then they were going to start the cars, and here we go. And you maybe retain a little bit of that audience. So best case scenario was NASCAR runs long. A little long, not that long. Because if NASCAR would have run the normal time, NASCAR still would have had like a 30-minute post-race show. That's not ideal either because people tune out for post-race shows. They see the Victory Lane interview and then they move on. What we really were hoping would happen is that the Cup race would end at about 6:22. If you could time it out perfectly, Cup race end at 6:22 Eastern time. They do a Victory Lane interview, maybe second, whatever. But then it's straight to Sonoma. Hey, we're ready for another race. Oh, and you're telling me this is the championship race? It's the last race of the season? You're telling me this guy can win his 5th championship, or, oh, that guy on Amazing Race that won the 500 is the other. All right, I'm going to stay here. That's the next scenario. And then there's what happened. The NASCAR race goes long, and we were still in a position where if there wouldn't have been the red flag, it still would have worked out fine. We had, we're planning on a report. I'm standing next to Rossi's car. I'm doing a report right as they start the engine. So we get the word at about 28 after. No, that's blown off. We're going to be coming on the air, and the cars are already going to be released. So, by the way, also, this is a question for Curt, too, that he can talk about a little later on. They did delay the start of the IndyCar race by, I think, about 6 minutes. So we did hold off a little bit, and I don't think they did the command until 6:38, 6:39, something like that. So that was the first thing. And then, obviously, it was decided, we can only push it back so much, especially once the drivers sit down in the car. It's not fair in their biggest race to make them, my guess is what the thinking was, sit there for 20 minutes. Once you put them in, then within a reasonable amount of time, you've got to go and get it started. But the idea was, this is still going to be fine. Everyone will live without my report on Alexander Rossi. We get him on, we get to the green. Well, then they have another caution. So then what happens is NASCAR is in a red flag, and they come over right as the green is dropping, technically about 10 or 15 seconds later, because they were out of turn 2, headed up the hill at that point, flipping over. And then they stay with it through the red flag and then toss back, and you missed 10 laps. Again, not ideal if you're only watching NBCSN. But, and as I'm looking at Twitter after the race, and I'm seeing a lot of comments, well, they never mentioned CNBC. They never said what was going on there. Well, I watched the race today. They did. So yes, you didn't have a pre-race show. And again, going back to the thinking, the idea was for the benefit of the teams, from a business standpoint, for the benefit of IndyCar, your best chance, and I'm sure IndyCar was on board with this, we'll ask Curt, best chance to get your best rating was to have action immediately. Would we like to have 20, 25 minutes to set up the stories? Yeah, but that's going to probably hurt your rating, and I think that's one reason why for the hardcore IndyCar fans that are into that, we told all the stories in 2 practice shows and a qualifying show. There wasn't anything new we were going to be able to tell you that someone paying attention didn't already know, and we think the casual fan was going to be more likely to stick with us if we saw action. So once the worst happens, the Cup race goes over, you've got a few options. You could just simply have said, we're going to start when we plan to start, and it's going to be on CNBC. Well, that blows your chance of having a good rating because, as we've talked about before, it seems like you have to pick. So, and we also know that CNBC is appointments viewing for sports fans, that you've got to go search it out, and not everyone is going to find it, and you're getting no one just kind of flipping through. And you're splitting your audience. You're taking some away from your NASCAR audience, which you prefer not to do. Again, this is business. And admittedly, not ideal for fans. And as a fan, and I understand this, I understand why people are angry, because if I'm a fan, and as a fan, I don't care what your television rating is. I want to see the race. I want to see the green flag. I don't want to miss 8 or 9 laps or whatever it was. So I understand that. But other than not having the pre-race show, and getting to see, obviously we got there about 10 or 15 seconds later. There's a lot of things going on, getting them to toss to us and so forth. So would have loved to have gotten it 10 seconds earlier, so we would have first seen the contact with Rossi. As soon as we come on, we see that Rossi's damaged. So we saw many, many replays. You didn't miss too much at that point. Then, as they go back to NASCAR, it was said by Lee Diffie and on a graphic, the IndyCar race continues on CNBC. And while I don't have everyone's cable package, I feel pretty confident that most of you, if you get NBCSN, get CNBC. You're probably going to have to do a search for where it is.
I'm pretty sure that's the case.
But
yeah.
CNBC is actually in like 5 to 10 million more homes. NBCSN is in, 80 million, and I think CNBC, it may have changed, but last I checked was something like 90 million. It's significantly more homes. It's just not one of the places we're looking for sports. And if you're not a sports fan, you don't, or if you're not a business fan and watching them during the week, then you don't know where it is. So, but it was possible to still go watch it. I understand it was a little bit annoying that they just kind of abruptly stopped on CNBC, but okay, logic. If that happens to me, what am I doing? I'm going to go back to the original channel that it was on and see if I can find it there. So, unfortunately, you missed the 5 or 10 seconds until you got to the clicker. Again, it's not ideal. Now, one other option could have been, and I don't know the thinking of how that works. I suppose you could have started up early as planned on .com. Not a lot of people were going to find that, because even though everyone keeps telling us that digital is the wave and that's where everybody needs to be right now, it's still like 3% of what a television audience was. And most of us aren't going to go to the trouble to go pick up the computer and then authenticate our television subscriber provider and everything else. So you would have gotten some, and I think it was available once we went on the air. That was the other option. Yeah, it was on .com, and I think NASCAR coverage continued while they were away on .com. The next thing I saw was, well, NASCAR keeps crashing. It's their fault. Don't let them finish. Now, come on. They're your partner, too. You're telling me you're shifting a race that's just about over in its deciding stages over to a different channel. How's that going to go over? And I don't look at NASCAR message boards, but I'm going to guess they were livid as well. So my wife and family were in a restaurant watching, And when it cut over to IndyCar, they thought the restaurant changed the channel, and people, a couple of tables were screaming, "What are we watching? We're not watching this. We wanted to watch the end of the NASCAR race." So unfortunately, there's no ideal way to do that there while keeping in mind your business objectives. Could you have put it on CNBC? Maybe, and I'm sure this will all be discussed, and they'll look at this if this potentially comes in. I think it was a gamble. You gambled. You hoped it worked out. Unfortunately, it didn't. That may not be a satisfying answer, but I think those are some of the things and the reasons that things were done at that point. And when they were switching, I heard Diff mention it was on CNBC. And as soon as they got to NASCAR, Rick Allen said, if you're looking for IndyCar, it's on CNBC right now. So not perfect. A little bit clunky, but trying to make the best of it in that kind of situation. All right, Curt Cavin joins us now as we continue, and we'll go back to the top. And I've already given kind of my opinions and rundown of what's happened, so this will be your chance to share some thoughts on what you thought of the Championship Sunday race. I should ask you, as the Vice President of Communications for IndyCar, what I was asked at the beginning of the show, and I just kind of tried to give some of the thoughts, and I understand I'm not privy to all of the decision-making for NBC and what ultimately, let's face it, it wasn't ideal. Perfect world, as I said, was that the NASCAR race would have ended about 7 or 8 minutes before the starting airtime. They do a victory lane interview, and then they come straight to the IndyCar race, and they get right to the act. How did IndyCar see this? What did IndyCar know ahead of time as to what the scenarios could possibly be?
Well, let's remember that we've talked for about 3 years about trying to get onto an afternoon where the IndyCar race would follow the NASCAR race. I mean, we have all wanted that. And so here was your opportunity, both on essentially the West Coast, and you want to start that race minutes after you come on the broadcast at 6:30 Eastern. You want to be able to roll right into the race and continue to show the people who are watching the NASCAR race what a good product IndyCar has. In this case, the gamble that NASCAR would end on time or as scheduled didn't materialize. NASCAR ran a little bit late. There was some juggling that went on. You sent it to CNBC, to IndyCar for a few minutes. And I'd say in this case, the way it worked out, probably both audiences were a little frustrated. If you remember back 5 or 6 years ago, this is what kind of used to happen all the time. It doesn't happen as often now with multiple TV options or channel options. But you think about basketball games that you're waiting to see in so you can start your game, and then your game starts a few minutes late.
Yeah. We
obviously held the green flag in this case a few extra minutes. I don't know, it was probably 5, 6, 7 minutes that IndyCar held the green flag, or gentlemen, start your engines. So, we tried to make it work. It's what we've been asking for. It didn't work quite as cleanly in this case, and what was really disappointing was it missed the key moment of the race, or at least that could have been developed more had IndyCar been on schedule. And that's the Rossi accident, of course. But I still think it was better than, say, waiting an hour after the NASCAR race and then losing those potential viewers.
I even thought about this in my headset and just talking to myself briefly, and then I dismissed it. But, should we just start calling the thing and basically do TiVo? And when they come to us, we just start it from the beginning. But you can't win in that situation either, because today's world does not accept even 5 minutes delayed, because it's going to be spoiled on Twitter. So that's not a perfect way to do it. And, it's hard to catch up, and it becomes kind of cumbersome in that situation as well. I was looking for this tweet that I saw from someone that doesn't work for IndyCar and doesn't work for NBC about that. It's Tony J. Ryder. Says, I can't believe IndyCar fans are upset about right now. A ton of NASCAR fans who wouldn't have bothered otherwise got to see the first couple of laps at Sonoma, which coincidentally featured a huge bit of championship drama, might have gotten a few more eyeballs. So always different ways to look at it. And like I said an hour ago, I understand if people don't want to hear what we're saying in this explanation, and not acceptable to them. You're not concerned about the ratings. You want to see the race. I understand that not everyone's going to be happy, but that's how it went. Maybe there's something that they can come up with a little bit better that still protects the business aspects and still serve the fans. But I'm just trying to give you an idea of what the thinking was behind that, and that's my best guess as to what all the thinking was.
I might also point out that IndyCar information ran across the ticker on the NASCAR race, so there was continual reminders. In fact, if anything, I might point out that there was IndyCar logos on, or information on the NASCAR broadcast when it wasn't intended to be there as
that
well.
was probably a mistake. We're trying to keep that quiet.
Yeah, well, for the purpose of this show, we can say that IndyCar got a fair amount of play on the NASCAR race. Look, we're trying to mesh the audiences, and I think over the course of this contract and the time that IndyCar has already had with NBC and NBCSN, is that IndyCar will be better off for having a unified broadcast partner with NASCAR.
Well, and you got a chance to you got the same people working on staggering the times as best possible to try to avoid them running at the same time, whether they're on the same channel, different channels, whatever. And there may be situations next year where one property is on NBC, one is on NBCSN. And I guess we should answer this. I saw a lot of comments. Why didn't they just put the IndyCar race on NBC? Well, you can explain that, right? That was not an option.
No, it wasn't an option.
Contractually, ABC still holds exclusive over-the-air broadcast rights to IndyCar, well, until this past Sunday. They no longer do, but they did until Sunday, and that was not contractually allowed to do that. And there's something, whatever was on NBC, you can't just bounce whatever they have at that time. I know we may not care about it, but somebody did, and you've got those arrangements involved. They're fortunate that they at least do have an outlet like CNBC, but ultimately you're trying to avoid that because CNBC is not a destination for sports fans. We've seen the ratings. When a race is live on CNBC, instead of 400-some thousand to as high as this particular race was, I think, 630,000, which was the highest finale since 2015, the CNBC ratings are always in the 100,000s, and I think I remember one that might have even been less than that. So you're trying to avoid that, unless you just don't have any other option. So that's where that stands. All right, we'll see you next week. We'll talk to you Thursday. Thank you, Curt.
Okay. See you, Kev.